Where in the world is God? Where in the world is God? I have to be honest, that's a question I've been asking a lot this past year, 2020. Where in the world is God? When there is so much in the world that isn't right, where in the world is God? Where in the world is God in the midst of the COVID pandemic that has killed so many people and upended so many lives and caused so much uncertainty and anxiety and fear and suffering and grief? Where is God in all of that? Where in the world is God when a police officer kneels on a black man's neck until long after he can no longer breathe? Where is God in that? Where in the world is God when a president clears a crowd of protesters with tear gas so that he can have a photo op in front of a church with a Bible in hand? Where in the world is God when migrant children are separated from their parents and incarcerated in cages in detention centers? Where in the world is God in the midst of a global refugee crisis when tens of millions of people are displaced with no place to call home? Where in the world is God when thousands of people without homes live on the streets of our own city? Where in the world is God in the midst of climate change, in the midst of hurricanes that wipe whole communities away, and forest fires that set the whole West Coast ablaze? Where in the world is God in all these things? I mean, if God is so great, how come God doesn't just come and fix all these problems? Why doesn't God just wave a magic wand and make everything okay? It's not that I don't believe in God, but I do want to ask God sometimes, and never more than this past year, 2020, God, where are you? The truth is, people have been asking that question for a very long time, since the beginning. Since pretty much the first time that people came to believe in God, they've wanted to know, God, where are you? When so much seems wrong with the world, where are you? It's a question that's also at the heart of our Christmas celebration, because it's a question that people were asking 2,000 years ago on that very first Christmas. You see, not so unlike today, there was a whole lot that didn't seem right with the world in first century Palestine. Things were pretty bleak, actually. The whole Jewish people were living under the shadow of the Roman Empire who occupied their land, the land that they thought God had given them. They were a colonized people, and life under the Roman occupation was not a good life. The Romans were known for using fear tactics, sometimes brutal fear tactics, to maintain control of the people. Crucifixions were common. People lived under the constant threat of violence, and that's the way the Romans wanted to keep it. Perhaps you can imagine in a time like this that people, many people, were wondering, where in the world is God? Where is the God who chose us to be his people? Where is the God who made a covenant with us? The God who delivered our ancestors out of slavery in Egypt with great power and might? Where is this God now? And why doesn't he do something? Why doesn't he come with power and might and deliver us once again from this mess? The people were expecting a Messiah who would do exactly this, someone like a powerful king who would come and drive out the Romans and liberate them. They waited eagerly for such a Messiah to show up. They waited, as some of us do, for God to come and just make it all better. They waited, and they waited, and they waited. Little did they know, though, that God had already started to act. God had already started to come right into their very midst. But it was not in the way people had been imagining. It was in a different way. A way that God had never come before. A way no one was expecting. Certainly, no one looking for God to come with power and might. No, this time God was coming in a new way. Not from far away by staying in heaven and fixing everything from there with the wave of a magic wand. Not by coming in what was big or impressive or coming with a display of strength. But actually the complete opposite of all that. By coming close. By coming in what was small. By becoming vulnerable. Totally vulnerable. By sharing completely in our human vulnerability. The vulnerability of an unmarried teenage girl who somehow found it to say yes to an angel. The vulnerability of a poor couple living in an occupied land. The vulnerability of a helpless baby born on a cold night in an animal shed. This is the story we hear tonight from Luke's Gospel. Of course, it's the story we hear every Christmas, but this Christmas, in a year when so many of the trappings of Christmas that we normally take for granted have been taken away from us, a year when we are all more aware than perhaps ever before of our own vulnerability, I think there is an invitation for us to encounter the meaning of this story with fresh ears and fresh hearts. To really sit with what it means for the Creator of the universe to choose to share our humanity, to choose to take on our flesh and blood, to choose to be born and to grow up and to live as we do, to struggle as we do, to experience suffering and poverty and persecution, even to experience death. Not just to reach out a hand from on high to all of us who are stuck in the mud pit, but actually to jump right in the mud with us, to be there with us, so that from that moment on, whenever anyone would wonder where in the world God was, the answer would be, God is here. God is with us. God is Immanuel. This is what we call the Incarnation. God's decision made out of love to come close to us, to live and die as one of us, to dwell with us, to pitch God's tent among us, as a more literal translation of the prologue to John's Gospel puts it. Or as another more modern translation puts it, to take on flesh and blood and to move into the neighborhood. To take on flesh and blood and to move into the neighborhood. I'm reminded here of Something my spouse's dissertation director, the Jesuit theological ethicist James Keenan, once said. He was talking about compassion and trying to define what compassion is. And he said that compassion, true compassion, is when someone chooses to enter the chaos of another. Compassion is when someone chooses to enter the chaos of another, to show up there, to be present there. And in a way, in a powerful way, that's what the Incarnation is too, on a cosmic scale. It's God's choice, made in love, to enter into the chaos of humankind, the chaos of the whole world, to show up there, to be present there. There's a Christmas proclamation that puts it this way: Jesus was born because of God's loving plan to consecrate the world by his loving presence. Jesus was born because of God's loving plan to consecrate the world by his loving presence. That's what the Incarnation is. God's consecration of the whole world with God's presence. The good bits, yes, but also the chaos, the parts of the world that seem to be falling apart, the parts that seem like they're coming unraveled at the seams. The Incarnation means that God chooses to be with us in all of it. The Incarnation is what the world celebrates at Christmas. But for us, as Christians, the Incarnation isn't just something we remember, some dusty old relic that we take out of the attic and put out at Christmas time, something that happened a long time ago only to the people in the Gospels, to Mary and Joseph and the shepherds, something now distant and far removed from us. No, for us, followers of Jesus Christ today, there is more to the Incarnation. Because for us, the Incarnation is also about right now. It's about us. It's about our world in 2020 and our lives. It's about all of the places and times when we wonder, where in the world are you, God? It's about God's promises to us. God's promise to be our Immanuel. God's promise to be with us. Here's the thing about the Incarnation, though. It isn't magic. God's coming among us in flesh and blood, it isn't a quick fix to all of the world's problems or to our problems either. The Incarnation isn't like flipping a switch and making everything better. It won't protect us from what is hard to bear. It won't save us from pain or suffering or guarantee us a life full of happiness. It won't make COVID go away overnight, or magically fix racial injustice, or police brutality, or climate change, or the global refugee crisis. The Incarnation doesn't automatically fix all of these things. What the Incarnation does is something else. What the Incarnation changes is something else. Us. By giving us something. The love, the courage, and the grace that we will need to make our way through the darkness and into the light. The love and the courage and the grace that come when we know that we are not alone. Never. the love and courage and grace that come when we know that God has promised to be with us here, always, closer to us than our own breath. And it's this promise to be close to us that changes everything, that changes us, that changes the way we are in the world, that helps us to love in ways that we couldn't otherwise love, that gives us courage to face what we need to face and to fight what we need to fight, that gives us grace to grow into the people that we're called to be. That's what it means to be people of the Incarnation. A people who are not alone in the darkness, never. A people for whom God's choice to dwell with them is part of their own flesh and blood. A people who ask not just where in the world God is, but much more importantly, how will we live our lives knowing where God is? Here, with us, Immanuel. Amen.